let's go talk with Tim, he, him from China. Sounds like you want to talk about some reincarnation. So, hey, Tim, you're on with Secular Rarity and Forrest.
Hello?
Hello.
Oh, hey, sorry, my phone broke up. Hey, how's it going, guys?
Good. How are you?
You're really well.
Oh, pretty good. Yeah, first of all, I wanted to thank you guys very much for running the show. My own background is I was raised in the American Bible Belt as like a Baptist, and you guys helped push me in the direction of atheism, so definitely thank you guys for that.
Awesome. Real quick, Tim, are you, real quick, Tim, hang on. Tim. Are you on speakerphone by any chance? Because we're getting some kind of echo. Can you take us off speakerphone and put your face to the mic?
I am. Oh, okay. Yeah. 1 second. Will do. Okay. Yeah. Let me
just hard to hear you. We want to make sure everybody gets good audio from you.
All right.
Oh, that is so much better.
Sure. Is that any better?
Immediately better.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nothing.
Great.
Oh,
there you go. Yeah. So, as I was saying, I practice Jainism. Are you familiar with that at all, or?
A little bit.
What was it again? Say the name again.
Huh? Okay. Jainism, the Jain religion.
Oh, yeah.
I would say it's the world's only religion, in that it rejects the idea of creationism, and it's just the universe is internally a recurrent system, essentially, that we find ourselves in. So, I guess it's kind of a gift to you guys. First of all, I'll give you guys the Jain argument against creationism, against God, which is simply that, in order to create a world, a being would have to, on some level, be physical. And if it's physical, it's subject to change, or what we may call entropy in terms of modern physics. So therefore, it couldn't be eternal. So there couldn't be a being that simultaneously created the world and is eternal. So it rejects the idea of a created external, Abrahamic sort of, Abrahamism wasn't really what they're responding to, but it seems to undercut that kind of idea of a God.
I think there's a little bit of an issue with that, but I don't think it's terribly important. But I do think there's a bit of an issue of saying that simply because something is physical,
and maybe
it can't be eternal, right? Because we don't necessarily know that that's the case. Yes, entropy obviously is a big deal, but the universe itself could be eternal in some sense, and it's just that it's kind of changing how the energy presents itself. So, but anyway, I don't think it matters.
I like the argument. I like where it's coming from.
Yeah.
I know, having done this and other shows like this, I know for sure the answer will be, but magic. You know what I mean?
that is a good point. That is a good point. But yeah, either way, keep going, Tim. Yeah.
So the main point I wanted to make was maybe a probabilistic argument for some form of reincarnation or some form of eternal return, that sort of idea.
Sure.
So where this comes from is we have the conscious mind, right? And we have the physical world. So for example, you would say the idea of a chair, right? The word chair, right? That is an idea, that's a concept. That's not the same as the physical chair itself, right?
Yeah.
Are you talking
in Sanskrit,
mental concepts, or are you talking about Plato's idea of the world of forms?
Yeah, I would disagree on the second thing Forrest just said, but I would
agree
on the first
I understand
thing.
what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Sure. So I would say what they would say called jiva in Sanskrit would be essentially all your senses, all your thoughts, all your memories, kind of everything the mind does. And then the external world, right, would be ajiva, just meaning just like theist, atheist. It's another Indo-European religion, so kind of the same morphology going on there. But the two are necessarily interlinked, is the Jain idea. So, the classic paradox, they would say, is from one point of view, the entire universe is in modern physics, you would say, inside of your brain, in that, any experience, any memory you have, even if you're looking at a star millions of light years away, that's still some neuronal activity in your brain of the observation itself. So any phenomena happening in the world is really actually just neurons in your brain. But at the same time, your brain is an object in the universe. So the two are simultaneously true. So you can't really separate the phenomenological from the physical. They're just they form a dynamic system, is the idea.
So
there's always consciousness and there's always the physical.
Let me kind of poke a little bit here at something, Tim, because I'm worried that
Sure.
I'm worried that where you're going is a little bit more into that thing that Forrest had mentioned briefly about like the Plato, the ideal forms and stuff. And I want to make sure that we're all understanding each other and stuff. So
Okay, I'm not a Platonist then.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. But it seems to me that what's really going on, right? More often. So like when you say the whole universe can essentially be encapsulated in your brain, right? In some senses, I don't think that's a sense that's in anything meaningful. I think that's it's a very flowery, pretty way to try to explain the fact that at the end of the day, what seems to be driving us as people is this squishy substance in our head. But what's really important about that squishy substance and the thoughts and concepts and all the firings of the neurons and whatnots is the relation to the things outside of us, right? So the important aspect is not that all of the senses are going on in the brain and all of the phenomenon is occurring in the brain. It's the fact that the phenomenon that's occurring in the brain has a direct correlation to the other things outside of us. Does that make sense?
Oh, I would agree.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool. Then we're on the same page.
And
there.
actually,
Cool.
like Jains would say, like there couldn't be, and there couldn't be such a thing as like a ghost in like the very classical sense of just a mind but no body, because it would have no means of interacting with the world and no means of perceiving anything. So it would have no experience of anything.
I think we're both
so like
on board
mind,
with that,
so to speak, whatever we want to use in kind of impersonal. Cool. So would you say like the brain generates consciousness or the brain channels consciousness, in your opinion?
Generates.
I would say generates, because channel seems to me to imply that it would be consciousness in that sense would have to be like radio waves. Like it's out there playing and we pick up on it. But there doesn't seem to be any indication that I've ever seen, at least, that would indicate that. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. So I can still make an argument from that. So like essentially consciousness is sort of an emergent phenomenon of, all the particles in your brain being in a certain position according to the laws of physics. Am I correct?
More or less, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a way to break down that sentence, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think that's, I don't think that's a terrible understanding, so.
All right. So then, are you familiar with the idea of like the Poincare recurrence theorem?
Say again?
So
you broke up a little bit.
Oh, the Poincare, I may be pronouncing it wrong, but it's like Poin. Okay, sorry. In mathematics, there's something called the Poincare recurrence theorem. I may be saying it wrong, but it's like Poincarre. So
I'm not familiar with it, so yeah,
right, and you roll the dice. Okay. Yeah, so like if you have a dice, like, a nerd, I play D&D, right? So, roll a D10, right? And you roll it again, and you roll it again. Once you've rolled it 10 times, mathematically, it's going to have to repeat at least once, right? Because there's only 10 possible ways this dice could roll. Or, the six-sided dice, roll it 6 times. Eventually, it's going to have to repeat.
Sure.
So if you look at the universe, the observable universe is a certain volume. It's a really huge volume, but it is a finite volume. And they're particles, and therefore a finite number of arrangements of the particles. So if you wait a very, 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 very long time, we could ever conceptualize, but you could calculate what this is, and it's something like 10 to the 10 to the 10 to the E or something like that, I've heard. And at that point, it doesn't matter if we're saying like seconds or years. Yeah.
Real quick, I just want to make sure we're all following, because I thought this might be where you were going when you brought up that mathematical concept a second ago, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. It kind of sounds like what you're saying is, because let's just hypothetical sake here, let's just say that all of this is true, which is there's only so many ways that we can arrange that atoms can be arranged, right? And if we just wait long enough time, eventually there seemingly would be this recombination of atoms in such a way so as to give my brain the same structure that it has right now. Is that kind of where you're going?
Sure. Yeah, like if you wait long enough, every possible thing will repeat infinitely times every possible way.
Okay.
I have a million problems with that.
Yeah. Please, Forrest, go ahead and.
Okay. So, just to start with, because I get where you're coming from here, is that like, so I looked up this theorem that you're talking about to make sure I was on the same page as you, and yeah, it's the idea. It's sort of like the normal distribution in elementary statistics, where it's like, if I repeat this system enough times, eventually it will distribute normally. With this one, if I repeat this thing enough times, I can pick any random arbitrary formation of it, and it will hit that random or arbitrary formation again and again and again. It just takes a long time to do it. And you're right. That makes sense mathematically and statistically. That vibes. The problem is, when we talk about consciousness as an emergence property of brains, you keep using the word particles, and I'm going to come back to it. But like the brain is made of neurons. There are about 86 billion neurons in the human brain, if I remember right. So we have, if we're talking about what's coming out of my brain right now, it is because of the exact configuration of those 86 billion neurons. Let's say every single human that has ever been born or will ever be born has the exact same number of neurons, which isn't true, but whatever. Let's say we have the exact same number of neurons in every single brain. How many different permutations can you get out of 86 billion objects in whatever configuration they would be? A freaking lot. I look at I looked up to make sure I had the formula right. The way to calculate permutations has a couple of factorials in there. So like you've got a lot going on here with 86 billion factorial as your numerator, and then 86 billion minus the number of objects selected, which would be all of them. But like you've got like, so how many generations would you have to have for this theorem to take into effect? How many different human lifespans we have to cover for 86 billion things to hit that exact same one permutation again of being in this exact configuration? It's a really long time. So if that was your argument for reincarnation, that eventually with enough humans, if we all have the exact same number of neurons, you will get a human with my exact neuronal configuration again. Sure, it would take trillions and quadrillions of lifetimes, but like maybe you'd get one. But then there's the additional problem of the fact that like my personality, who I am, the person sitting here speaking to you today is not just this configuration of neurons. It's also my experiences that play into how these neurons are firing and going off. So like they would have to have lived my exact life as well and have all my same experience and thoughts and behaviors and habits and things that are now being played out through these neurons that are they're being played on this like a piano. So like the sheet music of my life being played on the instrument of my exact neuronal configuration, showing you now this weird Caucasian mess. That's another factor that you have to put in here. It's not just the permutations of the neurons, it's the permutations of the lifetimes and the life histories and experiences, my parents and my family and my friends and my wife and every good and bad thing that ever happened to me, all building up to this moment. Like those also have to have repeated perfectly to get to where we are right now. And then you get into like a whole problem of free will, which is not where this call is supposed to go. But I'm just saying, like, I get where you're coming from. And on paper, it sounds great. But in practice, it doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah. So, Tim, in the words of the great Johnny P, what is thy response?
Yeah. So I would say you are correct. Certainly, like if we're talking about, the chance of all the events happening that get to this present moment, yeah, it's going to be a crazy small number or however you're going to put that. But the thing to keep in mind too is like, there isn't just one way to have a brain that generates consciousness, right? Other people certainly are conscious and they have different arrangements of neurons, right? And we're not necessarily talking about like Boltzmann brains where it's just, particles are randomly forming a brain in like deep space out of just pure quantum chance. We were part of an evolutionary system that, the brains of our ancestors were useful for their survival, and over time it kind of evolves a certain way. So if you're talking about like and just think about in your own life, right? Like they say, like, I don't know if this is totally true or not, but they say like every 7 years, all the cells in your body change, even if that's like literally true. Like certainly the particles, you're eating, you're breathing, you're shitting. Yeah, and the state you're in now is not the state you were in, 5 seconds ago. That's constantly changing, but you have a continuous consciousness. So consciousness isn't tied to one particular state of neurons, but it's more this dynamic system that allow
I would
consciousness to either generated or
I would agree
channeled
with
or
that, Tim, but I think one of the things that you might be overlooking in this instance is if what we're trying to do is essentially say there seemingly is a formation of matter currently that has some experience, some progression forward in time, doing actions, thinking thoughts, all this stuff, right? And that eventually, once we just watch the clock tick enough, we can get back to that same lump of matter that has all these things. But see, what's interesting for me and problematic is how you just said, like, well, we know that different formations of neurons can give us consciousness. Like, well, yeah, totally. But I would definitely say that changing the structure of your brain would have dramatic effects on your personality. I mean, we've seen this. And if what we're talking about at the end of the day is this idea of reincarnation, of essentially living multiple lives, then if we, let's just say 86 bajillion years down the road, and these neurons are starting to form again, that would make SR, but the brain forms in a different pattern, well, then that wouldn't be reincarnation, right? That wouldn't, because it's not the same construction from the beginning.
Sure. And I mean, I could get into kind of like the giant metaphysics, but if you don't have the experience of this, it's probably just going to sound strange. I mean, so like, unlike the Abrahamic religions, we don't really have the idea of faith. Like, it's something you shouldn't believe any because you read it in a book somewhere. It should be something you experience for yourself. And through like meditation and certain practices I've had kind of a state of ego death where I had consciousness, but it's not really tied to my identity, if that makes sense. And so the idea, and this might sound very strange if you don't have this kind of a mindset, but that like consciousness kind of finds the physical system, the brain, or I would even think like an AI could be conscious, if it's sufficiently well developed, and it kind of connects to that. There's kind of a connection between the two. But if you have kind of more of the model work, you could see how, it would seem unlikely to get exactly the same one, certainly.
Yeah. Well, I think there probably is some more meat on this bone. But what I'm going to suggest, Tim, is that you give us a call back next week or the week after, because I know we've got a few more calls in the queue. I've got some great super chats I got to read too. But I do really think this is an interesting discussion.
Oh yeah.
But I think one of the big sticking points for me is it seems like we're taking a concept that has never really been fully described and clarified, right? And we're kind of trying to shave off some of the things that are just obviously ridiculous, but we're still trying to keep this concept, even though we don't have a good understanding of what it is. And what happens when we do stuff like that, I find more often than not, is we take away the entire value and purpose of what this thing is supposed to be, right? The crux of what reincarnation is you getting to live another life with a connection to that previous life in some way, right? And it just seems to me almost like you've shaved off so much of the stuff that is clearly ridiculous that now the core aspect of what this concept is really isn't even coming through anymore. And that I always struggle with that when we take broad concepts and we kind of water them down to such a degree that they're just not what they're supposed to be anymore, But either way, Tim, I really did enjoy the crap out of this. And I think Forrest did too. So please give us a call back in the future. And if you've got any thoughts, we've got that awesome fan run Facebook page, fan run Discord. So go hit us up there and have some chats. So what do you think about the Boltzmann brain stuff, Forrest? That's always such an interesting thought to me. And I don't know how people get to that conclusion.
I think people, as someone who values his brain very much, I feel like people put way too much stock in like this brain is like this magical wonderland thing. It's just a collection of cells and it does some really dope things, but like you got to leave it there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.